Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our very first panel from Women's Insight panel. My name is Rena Reiser. I live in a small city in northern Israel called Carmiel. I facilitate embodied dance sessions for women and mind-body focusing sessions to help women clear out whatever's inside, getting in the way of them moving forward with what is important to them in life. And today we are starting off our first panel by talking about discussing how to be more accepting of our husbands. And I, put this out into the world, unsure of what the response would be. And I have to say that the response has been incredible. The questions that came in are, to me, a delight, because I think there's been a tremendous shift in our circles as it relates to how we think about marriage, how we think about our role in having a healthy, meaningful, happy marriage. Whereas once upon a time, it was, how can I get this to change in my husband? How can I put all the responsibility on him? I'm so perfect. I'm so innocent. He's the one that's at fault. And the questions that came in were all women who recognize that, yes, of course, I'd like him to change, but I recognize that there's something in me that needs to be different, something in me that I can contribute to this whole dynamic to help things be better, to improve my relationship. And it just fills me with tremendous warmth and hope. And my tefillah is that this gives Hashem tremendous nachas ruach, that we are all building our own, mikdash ma'at, our own personal mikdash ma'at. And Hashem, look at what we're working on. Look at what we're trying to accomplish in this world. And if this is what we're trying to do with our mikdash ma'at, could you please bring down the third final Beis HaMikdash where we can all come together and serve you as one? So that is my tefillah for all of us here today. And what I would like to do before we introduce our panelists is I like to start off every interaction that I have with clients, and especially in a situation like this, a dynamic like this, for us to take a few minutes and check inside of ourselves and get clear on what our own intentions are for today, what each of us wants to get out from today. You'll be able to chat with me through the chat box, and there are some questions that I'm going to ask our panelists, and we'll have a conversation. But before we do that, I think it's helpful, even if you're going to be washing dishes while you listen to this or whatever you're going to be doing, let's just take a few minutes at the beginning to help us get grounded, help us get centered and here together, and get clear on what we want to get from today. What's that, that one insight that you're hoping for, that one thing that would make all the difference for you, for your marriage, for whatever it is in your life that you're hoping will be different. So let's take a few moments to get grounded. Take a few deep breaths in and out. You can leave your eyes open or closed, whatever works better for you. And feel your feet on the floor, the connection that your feet have with the ground that's underneath them, that's supporting them. And notice your legs and your pelvis. And see how you can let yourself sink into the surface that you're on just a little bit more, really feeling its support, how it's holding your body today. And noticing your back, your arms, your shoulders. As I do this, I become aware of my heart pounding out of nervousness. And then we're just going to acknowledge that. Noticing your neck, your head, and your face. And now bringing your attention to the center of your body, to the whole area that includes your throat, your chest, your stomach, and your lower abdomen. I'm going to ask you a question and see if you can kind of swallow this question and let it go throughout your whole body. What is the one thing I'd like to be able to gain from today? And let it wash through all parts of your body. And stay with whatever comes up, whether it's tiny, whether big, whatever you're noticing. Just staying with whatever comes up. And staying with it for another few moments. Maybe writing it down. And then slowly bringing your attention back here together with us. And let's get started. So I'm going to I think I put my phone somewhere else. So I'm not going to be able to use that as a timer. I have to use a different timer. I am going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And you're going to have 1 minute to introduce yourself, and then I'm going to stop you. So let's start with Rivka. You're right next to me in my screen here. So why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Hi, I'm Rivka Slatkin. Thank you for having me. Nice to meet you all. My husband is an Imago relationship therapist, and I support him in workshops that he presents to couples. And we do 2-day couples workshops and private retreats using Imago therapy.
Where do you live?
So we live in Baltimore. I wish I was in Israel too. But I will say you've attracted a very broad audience. So I had some people that are not Jewish say, "Can I join?" And I said, "I think so." So
Sure.
you've really attracted a very wide audience. So great job on the marketing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks to all of you. Okay. All right, Rivka, thank you so much. Okay. I think you guys are not allowed to unmute yourselves. So coming up. There you go. You should be able to unmute yourselves now. Kayla, can you introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, I'm Kayla Levin. I'm a life and marriage coach and a podcast host. I have a podcast, used to be called First Year Married. It's now How to Glow. Sorry, I'm the tail end of Corona. So I'm a little bit scratchy still, but I really started out focusing First Year Married was originally my program and my course. And I was really focused on newlyweds, and as requests for that to grow. And also as my clients, the podcast is several years old now. They're not in Chana Rishona anymore. But as that's progressed, so the whole brand has kind of changed a bit. And I now have a coaching membership program called How to Glow, which my goal for that is really just for people who, my belief going into everything was that in our community, this isn't a question of we are only interested in working on our marriages if we're on the brink of divorce. These are women who, like Rena said, I think in the beginning, similarly, who are dedicated to having really good marriages. Okay, the end.
Excellent. Okay. We're going to get used to that because you all have like so much that you have to share, and I want you to share everything, but I also want to be mindful of everyone's time. So we'll get to know you more, and you can bring that into your next questions. Okay, Chana, go ahead.
Hi, Rena. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm so excited to be a part of this. My name is Chana Eisenstein. I'm a marriage coach and a relationship expert. For the past 2 decades, I've really been doing a lot of work on myself and helping other women be able to really find harmony in their homes and lives. And inspired by my own journey, I was so excited with what I came across that's what really led me to leave what I was doing as a special ed teacher and go into relationship coaching and really help other women find the peace and harmony and tranquility and love and intimacy in their lives. I do private sessions and group workshops, and Baruch Hashem, it's really wonderful to be here, and I'm excited to be part of this.
And where do you live, Chana?
I live in Houston, Texas. So I actually lived in Lakewood for many years, and we recently moved to Houston, Texas.
Okay. All right. And Kayla, you're in Ramat Beit Shemesh. You're on mute. Are you able to unmute yourself? Will it let you?
Sorry, I thought I could just mute myself in the meantime in case something came up. Yes, we're in Ramat Beit Shemesh. We were in Atlanta before that.
All right. Okay, amazing. So welcome. So let's get started with, we'll get started with some of the questions that people sent in. And what I'd like each of you to do is, so this time we started with Rivka, then we went to Kayla, then Chana. This time we'll start with Kayla, then Chana, then Rivka, and then Chana, Rivka, Kayla. And we'll just like keep going in a circle like that with each question. You'll each get about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Let's stick to 5 minutes to answer the question. So obviously the first person who answers the question will give their perspective. And then the next person who answers the question, if there's anything that you would do differently, anything you would want to add to what the person said, feel free to do so. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So the first question that the order that I put them in is, how can I be accepting of my husband, but also want him to change? Can I do both? Kayla.
Oh, yes, you're gonna have to remind me who goes when. Okay.
No problem.
That's too much math for me. Okay. So it's a great question. I think where I would start with that is that number one, we have to, anything we resist persists, right? So if I'm trying to get over wanting him to change, if I'm trying to push away wanting him to change, I'm not going to move past it very quickly, right? So I think that sometimes there's just a moment that we need to just pause and say, there's a part of me that would really like this, and it's not what I have right now. And I might even need to grieve it if it's something pretty big. And at the same time, what I see time and time again is that when we think there's an idea, and I don't hear it so much in this question, but I think it's so pervasive that if I hang on to my desire that it'll change, like if I accept something, then I'm just putting up with it and it'll never change. And the truth is that when we actually see what happens with our own behavior, when we become super self-aware of how am I when I'm resisting my husband or this thing about my husband, and I'm watching my behavior and I'm watching my emotional reaction and all of that, I'm usually just digging the trench deeper. I'm usually just reinforcing all the same old patterns. And so I think that self-awareness can be a really powerful first tool, because then we don't necessarily go to acceptance because we're ready to. We go to acceptance because we see that where we are just isn't working. And I think that for most of our brains, that's really compelling. And so when I see like, this isn't working right now, this pushing against it, it's having me do all these things. Look what I'm creating for myself. Then it just becomes easier to say like, okay, what else do I want to try? And it might just be something as simple as, this is what I have right now. What do I want to do about that? What do I want to create in that situation? So I'll just move it, let it go on to the other people from there.
All right, amazing. Thank you, Kayla. Chana.
Okay, so I think this is a really great question. I think it's something that probably every woman faces in some shape or form at some point in her marriage. And I think that really, like, the trick is to have that desire there, but to let go of the attachment. Meaning like, this is something that I want, I would love for it to happen, but I'm not going to make my happiness dependent on this. And I think that that's a huge, huge piece. I know actually just yesterday, I was speaking with a client and she was telling me how she really has desire for her husband to be more spiritual. And she said, and she's like, so I had this desire, but I realized I can't push it on him. It's just going to backfire. She had already tried pushing it on him and it backfired in the past. And as I was working with her and she learned how to let go, she said, you know what, I'm just going to daven for him. And then we were talking yesterday and she said, I have to tell you, this is unbelievable, but I was just davening and I let go. And my husband came home last week and he said, you know, there's someone in my work. He hardly ever gets to learn. I want to start learning with him every day for a half hour before work. And he felt so good about it. And like, he felt like he was doing this like amazing thing. Meanwhile, he was actually getting to learn himself. And it was just so nice to see how it manifested. And she just felt so good because it wasn't coming from her being a pushy wife. So I think that the trick really is for us to keep our desires, but drop the desperation, drop the attachment. You can daven, you can send positive energy, you can try to focus on all the times that your husband is doing it and share with him how much it means to you. But I think that dropping the desperation and the attachment really is the trick over here.
Thank you.
And what what you might want to do also is, you know, while you're in that phase when things are still changing, focus on the benefits that you have of him being the way that he is, because everything has drawbacks and benefits. So sometimes we want something so badly that the other side looks amazing and this side looks terrible. But really, nothing in life is all good and all bad. So if while you're in that stage, you can focus on the parts that are actually good, that'll also just help you not be so desperate and not be so attached and not be so naggy and all that other stuff that we try to avoid.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you. I just want to say it's really nice to listen to the other coaches, because I really don't coach women. We don't really work with individuals. We work with a couple together, because in Imago we view that it's neither him or her, but it's this space between. So it's really nice to hear the advice, and all of it's good. And I hope everybody listening knows that if they take one thing from all of us, it'll be great, hopefully. So coming from that paradigm of viewing the relationship, I guess I'm curious about if it's possible for the woman asking the question to ask herself, what is this situation triggering in me? You know, what is it about what he's doing or what he's not doing triggering in me? What does this remind me of? What feels familiar about this? In Imago, we believe that we attract somebody who's going to be who's going to have the positive and negative character traits of our primary caretakers, meaning our parents, grandparents, siblings. So there's going to be something familiar, something old about what's happening in the marriage, in the relationship dynamic. So if she can ask herself, you know, what is this triggering in me? Because really the only person you can change is yourself and how you respond. So can you get to a place of calm and really empty out your own personal nagias and really listen to your partner? And the good news is we do believe people can change. So, and now I'm forgetting the original question as I'm answering.
I'll read it to you. How can I be accepting of my husband, but also want him to change? Can I do both?
Yes. Okay. So also, I don't know what this person has been doing thus far. So there are some times where people have, let's say the husband or wife is in therapy and they expect to be in therapy for life. And really, like, our goal is not to have people in therapy for life. So I guess the question, I have so many questions, but one of them is also like, what is the husband doing till now? Is it working? And sometimes a change is needed if you're just getting the same results. But so I guess the answer to the question is yes, we believe a person can change, but primarily focusing on ourselves. What is this triggering me? What does this remind me of? And can I become aware of that? And sometimes all it takes is just awareness, like, oh, I get it. This is bothering me because I remember when such and such happened to me, or my deep need from childhood was X. And that's really why I'm being triggered.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone want to add anything else on this question, or should we move on to the next one? All right, let's go on to number 2. Okay. My husband is an incredible, super special person. He suffered emotional abuse and neglect as a child and only recently began a journey of diagnosis and treatment for ADHD. He has grown immensely, but the more he grows, the more it becomes clear that certain obstacles, like PTSD and ADHD, will never go away. It is sometimes hard for me to accept that even with therapy, forever, ? And medication, he might always be mistrustful, forgetful, a mess, low self-esteem, hard to find a job, etc. I understand getting through hard times, quote unquote, but how can I accept a quote unquote hard life without feeling resentful? Chana, can you start us off?
Okay. Okay. So number 1, I send you compassion. It definitely sounds like a challenge. At the same time, recognize that every single person has exactly what they need. This is exactly the spouse that you needed for your tafkid. Now, the thing is that when it's not really what the issues are, but how we're interpreting them that really bothers us. If you're going to tell yourself that your husband being forgetful is so impossible for you to live with, then you're right. You're going to be very, very triggered and very upset. If you're going to reinterpret that and say, okay, my husband being forgetful is something that's just like not geschmack in my life. And it's just something that is a little, yeah, like it's a challenge, but it's something that we can totally work through. And we can try to like figure out even like practical solutions. Maybe he can have like a notebook that he keeps in his pocket or like messages on his phone to remember certain things. I think that what it really boils down to is really how are we interpreting the challenges in our life? And I would say this for ADHD, I would say this for post-traumatic stress disorder, I would say this for many other issues. And this is like a really good thing that it's not really what's happening to us, but how we're interpreting it that's going to keep us really stuck and really not feeling good. Like, for example, I heard a question that somebody asked a marriage expert, and the person said, my husband always comes late. And I keep asking him to tell me that he'll be late, but he's not. How should I not feel like really insulted? And I was thinking, 1 second here, like, where does insult come in? Now, based on Imaga therapy, you would probably say this is something that she experienced as a child and she associated with being insulted and so on, and her feelings being hurt. But if you take it out of that context, I would draw from the story that maybe husband is not being so on top of things and he doesn't realize how much it means to her. Maybe there's some like responsibility factor, but where does the fact that she's interpreting as being insulting, she's causing herself so much like unnecessary of a rift in her relationship, because it's really not about her. I guarantee that her husband did not wake up and decide, you know what, I'm always going to come home late because I don't like my wife and I want to trigger her. Absolutely not. Okay, it's probably his personality and his things, and he just has a lot on his mind, and for him it doesn't matter to him if other people are late, so it's hard for him to understand that it means so much to her, and so on and so forth. So I would say in general, really kind of like looking at the situation and kind of like saying, is there a different way that I can interpret it? Then I would tell you also, which I'd really say is number one, is really daven Tashem, that your husband should be able to be there for you and be able to support you. And whatever parts are not totally the way you want them to be, you should be able to accept in him. And I would tell you another thing is also just believe in your husband. Whatever you focus on grows. Focus on all the times that he is responsible. Focus on all the times that he is there for you. And give him that message, both energetically and both in your words, telling him like, wow, thank you so much. It means so much to me that like you really pulled through with this. I felt so taken care of. And I think that when your husband sees that you have that confidence in him, you can do so much. Every person needs someone to have confidence in them. Like aim is milashon emuna. If a mother can have confidence in her child and give her child that confidence, that's amazing. But if for whatever reason his mother was unavailable to do that, you as a wife, you have a tremendous amount of potential to be able to give him that confidence. So every time you give him that confidence of like, I have confidence you can pull through in this, you're going to see he's really going to pull through more and more. And I wish you a lot of hatzlach, and I hope that you actually really see that.
I mean, thank you, Chana. Rivka, let's go to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the question. How can I recognize that my husband has had a hard life without feeling resentful? So I guess I'm curious just how resentful the wife is, and we can't answer that right now, but of course there's different levels. Is she so incensed that she just is so angry and, can't get past it, or is it a minor annoyance? But whatever the case is, I do believe that people can change, even those with ADHD right here, and emotional abuse and PTSD, when the environment in the home is one of emotional safety. So if she's nagging him, and why didn't you call me when you were coming home late from work? And why didn't you tell me that you hadn't paid this bill on time? And when there's shame and blame, he's going to get stuck in his reptilian brain, which is the lowest, most primitive part of the brain, which is fight or flight. And he's not going to be able to access his whole brain where he can come up with logical solutions and, better activities of daily living. So if she can focus on creating an environment of no blame and no shame and of emotional safety, a lot of times the symptoms calm down. And when that is the focus, really the symptoms can improve. There's also the knowing that there's been an emotional trauma, and then there's really getting it. So when we have a couple sit across from each other face to face, looking into each other's eyes, dialoguing about this frustration, sometimes, even though she logically knows his childhood story, sometimes she hears it on such a deep level that the compassion inside of her can grow for her husband, where they're both crying. And she's just as emotional about his childhood pain as he is. And they really get it. And the reason I can say this is because that was the story of my own marriage 20 years ago when we started having problems and we found an imago therapist, and then that started our journey. And I wouldn't be here if we hadn't gone through that. But so there's knowing the story and like, yeah, oh, my husband had emotional trauma. And I'm still frustrated. And then there's really knowing it. So if I can encourage the listeners to really, if you can just schedule a time to talk, ask for an appointment, make sure it's a good time. I'd love to hear a little bit more about such and such, when would be a good time to talk, or and see if you can really cross that bridge into your husband's world and really get it on a soul to soul level. And then it may not bother you as much. So it's really twofold. It's focusing on creating the emotional safety in the home, and then no blame and no shame, and then his symptoms can calm down, and then also really getting it at a deep level so you can feel deep compassion as a wife.
Hey, I'm going to use another 2 of your minutes to ask you.
Oh, sure.
I know that the Imago book is quite large, and giving over how to do an Imago session with a spouse.
You mean Getting the Love You Want, that one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. And giving it over will take a lot longer than a minute and a half. But can you just give like a few pointers of how the wife can sit across from her husband and have this conversation with him?
Sure. So it starts by asking for an appointment. Honey, I'd like to make a time to speak with you about a frustration I'm having. Is now a good time? You wait till it's a good time, no like dumping. And then really the process is mirror, validating, and empathizing. So as he's speaking, you don't respond, you don't excuse, you don't anything. You just serve as a mirror, reflecting back what he says. So if he says, or you say something, he should reflect it back to you if you ask him to engage in this process. So what I heard you say is blank. Is there more? And you just keep going. There's a sender and a receiver. When the sender is finished sending, the next step is validation. Well, that makes sense because X. Because I did come home later. That makes sense because you make sense. And then empathy is, two emotions that you guess the other might be feeling. I imagine you might be feeling sad, scared. It's usually mad, sad, scared, or glad. So you pick 2 emotions. Mirror, validate, empathize. That's the official Imago dialogue. And I can recommend smaller books later.
Amazing. That would be great.
Sure.
Thank you, Rivka. Okay, Kayla.
Okay, this is amazing. I'm loving this. Okay, so I'm just loving what everyone's saying so far. And I'm like writing notes, geeking out over here. So the only things that I think I would sort of add, other than a big amen to what we've said so far, is number one, I've found that with my clients, it can be very, very helpful to meet with the therapist to, especially based on certain things in this question, just to understand what are the facts on the ground, especially something like PTSD, which we throw around colloquially a lot. It's a very complicated diagnosis, but it's not too complicated to understand it much, much better, right? So whether that's meeting with the client, with the therapist, and just asking for a session to just understand, what am I working with on the ground here? What's coming from this, and what's coming from what's not covered inside this diagnosis? What can I expect? One of the things that she said is maybe this is forever with the therapy. She can ask that question. And the same thing with ADHD. And I think with any diagnosis that we're dealing with the spouse, it can be so helpful because what happens is our brains love to mix up the facts and the stories, right? And so we think that we're looking at the actual situation, but we're really already very deep into the story. And so when she can get really dry and just look at when she's ready, I think, like if she needs some time, but to just look at like, what are the facts on the ground? What do I know? Like, here's his diagnosis. Here's things I can expect to be true in my life now, right? Because it sounded like there's some frustration with partnering with him because of some of the ways that these diagnoses are playing out. So then at that point, then she's able, when we look at facts, then we can construct the story that's going to help us, right? So right now it's like, this is all very hard, which is understandable, but is also probably going to create a lot of emotional exhaustion on top of just the actual technical dealing with whatever it is that she needs to deal with. And I'm consistently blown away by how much of, especially as women, our energy comes from our mental state. Like constantly, like there'll even be times where I'm coaching a client and I'm like, with you, maybe not. With you, it sounds like you're really, really that tired. And then we look through it and she's like, by the end of the session, she's like, oh, all my energy just came back because this whole heavy story that she was carrying around on her shoulders was sucking so much from her. So it's important to be real with yourself. It's, important not to just like try and blast yourself with positivity that's not true for you, which is why I think it's really important to just start with the facts. These are the facts on the ground. What's a story that is believable for me? That's easier than this is really hard and I don't know how I'm going to do it, right? Or how could this be happening? But maybe like, this is, again, similar to what we said last time, like maybe this is what I have right now. What do I want to do? Or something along those lines, that will just sort of release a lot of that resistance, which can be really, really, like we all have enough on our plates. We don't need to add any more negative energy to it. So that's what I would suggest. I think another spin also on that, the idea that Chana shared so beautiful of like, we're given kind of what we need. One way that I love to look at this for my clients is like, in what way is my husband my guru, right? Like in what way is exactly the life lesson that I need to learn, something that he's modeling for me, not necessarily in dysfunctional behavior, but, like we said, like the husband who's very laid back with time is often matched up with the woman who might need to learn to be a little more present and flexible, right? So like, is there something in here that I can just kind of like, okay, like, let me just imagine he's my guru. Like, what am I picking up here? What am I learning here? How is this perfectly designed for my lesson? And it's usually something pretty big that we can be. And then again, it feels positive. It feels growth oriented. It feels productive and keeps us out of that resistance space.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone have anything else they want to add to this question before we go on?
I just wanted to say,
yeah.
oh, I'm sorry. I often hear my husband saying that we all have PTSD because childhood wounds all of us, and childhood is a trauma in itself. So we all kind of have PTSD from childhood. So that was just another little point I hear him saying a lot around this diagnosis.
Thank you.
I just want to add also, as to what Kayla was saying, I really like that, recognizing that a lot of the things that bother us and our husbands are really parts in us. We can call them disowned parts that have to come into balance. And when you realize that, as opposed to fighting it, you just embrace it. And you're like, wow, this is amazing. I can bring certain parts of me that I might have disowned or I might have like put down into balance through accepting it through my husband. And I think, speaking on the topic of acceptance, I think that the more you come to a place of acceptance, what's going to find is you're going to move out of judgment and into compassion. Like I always say, judgment is what keeps you and others stuck. When you stop judging and you move into compassion, you feel so differently. What comes to mind is I remember
I'm
like
going to stop you.
Okay, you stop me, no problem.
We're going to go on to the
Sure.
next question and then see
Yes.
if it can be answered. You can include that in one of the answers.
Sure.
Okay. This is a little bit similar, but it has a different question at the end. My husband suffers from low self-esteem and very poor self-image. How can I show my husband that I accept him if he doesn't accept himself? His inner voice is so much louder than me. On top of that, my love language is not words of affirmation, and I find it difficult to communicate this message to him. I think, Rivka, you're starting us off now.
Great. So we believe that in Imago that you're going to be attracted to somebody who the very thing they need the most is going to be the hardest thing for you to give. So like Chana was saying about the lost parts, I had a chart with me right here about the lost parts, but Yeah, the very thing he needs the most may be words of affirmations, and that may be the hardest thing for you to give. And marriage is ultimately for the purpose of growth and healing. So it would benefit you to stretch and grow and be able to provide the words of affirmation and get curious also, why is it that that part of myself is so hard to express? We find a lot of times a spouse that their love language is physical touch and that's what they need the most will often attract a spouse who went through sexual trauma and cannot do physical affection, and that's what their partner needs the most. And it's not a coincidence. That's why Hashem made, in my opinion, Hashem put us together, and that is the purpose of marriage, is so we can ultimately heal and grow together and then become one rather than two fractured individuals. So if you can learn more about yourself, why is it so hard to give words of affirmation, and then kind of reclaim that and then be able to stretch and grow and provide that for your spouse, that would be taking advantage of an opportunity and ultimately fulfilling the mission of what I believe is marriage. And then and viewing it as an opportunity for personal growth. As far as the self-esteem, and really with anything that's limiting, I guess the question is, is it impairing daily function? People shouldn't have to be in therapy for life, ideally. They should be able to improve and live a productive life and maybe look for a different treatment if it's not working and they're just kind of stuck. But ultimately, this is a really great clue, this Words of Affirmation Challenge, and a really good opportunity.
Thank you. Kayla.
So interesting, because my response, I was going to go a totally different direction, which Rena, I know you were saying, let's do it.
Yeah.
Which I love what Rivka says. And, this is not to say that that's not, equally valid. But the first thing that occurred to me when I heard the question was, I don't know is that what she decided he needs, or is that what he's expressed that he needs, words of affirmation? Because the way that I'm hearing it is that it almost sounds like, and we all do this, we get into this like fix it energy with our husbands, like, okay, let me roll up my sleeves, see what I can do. What does he need? Right. So she's noticing the low self-esteem. She's hearing the words that he's saying. And has she decided that what he needs is for her to start, does she need to get louder than his internal voice so that he can now have higher self-esteem? And in a way, it's still coming from that resistance, right? It's still coming from he needs to change. He can't stay like this with this low self-esteem. This needs to not. So I would just say, like, just really to take a minute first and just like lean back and just let him be as he is and sort of start to notice, what is he expressing that it is that he needs that could be the most supportive. And the way that I would just do that, it's a tiny, tiny tweak, because in both cases, she wants what's best for him 100%, right? And the tiny tweak is just going from, I'm not trying to fix his low self-esteem. I'm just trying to make sure I'm being a supportive and affirming wife. So with the information I know about him. So I might know that words of affirmation is what he likes, or I might know that touch is what he needs. But with what I know about him, how can I be the kind of wife that I want to be in this relationship? And then I can sort of slowly back my way up. So, okay, if that's what I want to be as a wife, then what actions do I need to be taking? What does that look like on a practical level? What am I doing? Am I packing his lunch in the morning? Am I writing him cute notes? Am I sending him little text messages throughout the day? What does that look like for me? And then I back myself up again. What would I need to feel about him? What emotions would drive all that behavior? And then I can figure out, like, what's the story that I want to be telling myself that's going to make me feel that way, that's going to have me show up that way. So again, it's kind of just moving a little bit more out of his lane and into her lane of how am I wanting to show up? And this is always what's in our control. His behavior, we don't know what's going to be with him, right? Exactly what's going to be with his self-esteem and what journey he needs to go on. But she can always be grounded in herself and how she wants to show up in the relationship.
Okay. Chana, do you have a third opinion on this? A third angle?
I actually don't. I'm actually really liking this. Okay. I think that okay, so the first part is probably just like kind of like recognizing what's going on, just accepting it instead of fighting it. And then also just to know that as Kayla said, like, you don't need to fix your husband, but you're there to support him. And the question is really, what could you do to support him? So the good news is that it doesn't just have to be words. A lot of it's just like the feeling that you give over, right? Like picture, for example, a wife that makes her husband a gourmet supper and like dumps it in front of him and goes to the other room versus a wife who puts together a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and the husband walks in and says, "Hi, how are you? I'm so happy to see you," and sits down and talks to him and wants to hear about his day and so on. So a lot of the relationship that we have is not even verbal. It's just like the energy. It's the feelings. It's a smile. And I think that that should make it a little bit easier for you as far as if you really feel like his self-esteem is such an issue and you want to work on it. Not necessarily do you have to make the words of affirmation be like the cure to it, unless you know that that's really what it is. It's very much just the energy. Like, what do you do when your husband comes home? Are you just continuing what you're doing? Are you like stopping what you're doing and showing him that you're really excited? Are you making it exciting for your kids when Tati comes home? I remember like years ago, as I was preparing to give a workshop, like my daughter must have been like 4 at the time, and we were in the playroom, and the door opened, and I told my daughter, "Go see who's coming," and she's like, "It's the best man." Now I don't know where she got that from. I don't know if it was just the energy or if I ever used that expression, but it was amazing to me how like your kids will pick up on it. The energy of the house will pick up on it. So if you're going to make it that you're going to continuously like give your husband this feeling of like, I value you, it's going to go very far. Now, at the end of the day, it's not up to you to cure him. And that's where I would tell you, bring Hashem in, ask Hashem to help, ask Hashem to cure him. And you're just like a shaliach on the way that's going to help with some of this. Now, as far as wanting more ideas for words of affirmation, I would tell you, Google it. Listen out for other people's ideas. And just like, sometimes when you hear a good expression, like just like record it in your mind or on a notebook and say like, hey, this is really good. Like, I want to use this. I remember like asking someone, how is your simcha? And she said, oh, thank you so much for asking. And I was like, oh, I like that expression. I'm going to start using it. So even if you don't have it naturally, just be open to it. And you'll see that ideas will come up for you as to how you can also use these words. Okay. And empower your husband. But at the same time, just remember that you're working on empowering him, but not curing him.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now, Kayla, we're going to start with you. And this next question is, I am intuitive and creative, and my husband is black and white. And I'm very sensitive to his energy, which often shuts me down. The problem is that he also is home a lot. How can I be more accepting in a way that doesn't affect me?
I'm going to start to sound like a broken record.
Good. Okay. Build it in.
Yeah. When you find something that works, you keep doing it. So I think I would have her step back again and go back to story versus fact and even do a T chart, right? What is the fact? Like, what is he literally doing? Right. And especially when we start to get our identities and our terms, like, oh, I'm more intuitive, I'm more creative, I'm more this, and, then we just like reinforce our stories so much. And then what happens is our brains want to be right. And so then our brains start to look for evidence that this story is true. So her brain's going to already be a little bit skewed for how black and white he is and how creative, intuitive she is and how that makes them different, right? Because as soon as you plant that story, your brain is like, I like to imagine it's like opening a case file. It's like, okay, great. Let's start gathering all the evidence that this is true, right? And it puts blinders on to what's not true about it. So I would literally have her do a T chart, right? So what is actually happening here? And then when she's having that experience of feeling shut down, so what was she telling herself about that thing? So she didn't give any specific example here, but like, let's say she starts sharing a thing and he just says, I'm sorry, I have to go. I'm going to be late for Minyan. Right. And she's like having like a very like, big emotional connection to him. Right. And so then she can check in with her emotional response to that and be like, what did I just make that mean? Kind of Chana said something similar earlier, right? What is the story that I'm saying that just sort of trips something for me right there. Right. And then she can sort of look at that and then slowly start to piece it apart. And the more that we piece that apart, it's like really going through the fine tooth comb, especially in our marriages, because more than anywhere, we're like swimming in our stories. We're swimming in all the like narratives that we have about our dynamic and how we're different. And then, you know, at the same time, I think she sounds like she's got a perfect guru for her, right? Like, what do we need if we're super artistic and intuitive and creative? Is we need somebody who's more concrete and more on this side. Like, that's a wonderful balance for many people, right? To have that side. So that's another place where she can look at it is, this is a different way, right? This is say, instead of sort of, I don't know that she needs to deconstruct her story completely, but I want her to be rooting herself in the fact of what's really happening. Right. Instead of, because when we're working inside of a story, we're very limited in how we can respond emotionally. Right. I'm in this really difficult situation. How can I feel energetic and positive? You can't, because you're calling it a difficult situation. Right. So you're going to have that horrible feeling of like fighting what you believe to be true. That's where we get that feeling of like, you know, someone gives us a positive thought, like, oh, Hashem never gives you something you can't handle. And you're like, go away. I don't want to hear that right now. Because right now, all I'm thinking is I can't handle it. Right. Our brain will just deflect that idea. So when she's rooted in that, in really what's going on, then she's going to have a little bit more flexibility mentally to look at it in a different way.
Thank you. Okay, Chana.
Okay. So I think that that's a very good perspective, Kayla. I think another thing is also the more we accept ourselves for who we are, the less it bothers us when people are different than us. So if you could, let's say, accept that, let's say you are this creative, fun type, and you could love that about yourself, then even if your husband really is more black and white, it doesn't have to faze you. Now, the question is really, what are you telling yourself about the fact, assuming your husband really is black and white, okay? What are you telling yourself about that? Are you saying we're incompatible? Are you saying we can't have a happy marriage? Are you saying I can't do what I want to do? Is that really true? So I would encourage you to really put yourself in a situation where you can feel good about yourself and it doesn't affect you. One of the things which I teach my clients how to do, which I actually find very effective, I actually do it for myself as well, is something called putting yourself in the cloud. Like, let's say there's something that, let's say someone else is doing that really bothers you, or maybe it's your own inner critic or your own fears. Picture yourself in a place where you feel very happy and very calm and very confident, and then make a cloud around it. And that cloud is like the Anan HaKavod. And let's take the story further, and let's imagine that husband's actually really criticizing you for being creative. So maybe let's say he wants the house to be kept a certain way, and you're more this like creative thing. You wake up Friday morning, you turn on some music, you like put up a challah, you like make a phone call, clear up the kitchen table, and your husband walks in, he's like, can you like get your act together, right? So what I would tell you to do is kind of like put yourself in the cloud. Put yourself in that cloud and just let it get swallowed up. Don't take it personally. That's his way that he would do things. But it's okay. You're a more creative person. If it works for you and you end up being ready for Shabbos in time, call it kavod. And I think, just recognizing that we're all different. And going back to what I was saying before about the disowned selves, chances are that your husband is like that to help you bring it into balance. So for you to be a little bit less creative and a little bit more focused. And I think keeping these things in mind just make it a much easier situation to deal with.
Okay, thank you, Chana. Rivka.
All very good points. Really enjoying listening to them all, and they all really make sense. The only thing I would add is, has the couple had new experiences together where they can go on a date and do something creative, or they can go on a date and do something more left brain? My husband and I are, I guess, an example of this, where I started out as much more emotional, creative one, and he was much more of the logical thinker. And I guess over the years, because our focus has been on making space for the other and creating emotional safety so we can fully grow into who we really are, I've become a lot more, embracing of his thought oriented brain, and he's actually become less rigid in that. So when the couple can have new experiences together, it creates new neural pathways. And when the environment in the home is one of emotional safety, one can be less rigid and one can be less rigid about being creative because they have room to fully become who they really are.
Thank you. Okay, so we have there are 3 more questions that were sent in, and I really want to make time for all 3. So and I want to stop at the hour to respect everybody's time. So we're going to do this a drop shorter. So we'll do 10 minutes per question so that we can get to like just past 10 to the hour. And so that means that everyone will get about 3 minutes or so to answer each question. So now we're starting with Chana. Okay, next question. I want to be more accepting of my husband, but it's hard because I carry the financial burden and all kid-related responsibilities. He is clueless about these things and in his own world. So I get stressed and anxious and wish it could be different. I don't know how to be more accepting.
Okay, sounds tough. It's hard when a lot of the pressure goes on you. And when we're in a pressured situation, it really is hard to really tap into our own best selves. The question is really, is your husband capable to help you with it somewhat? Sometimes we assume that husbands are not capable, but we never really gave them the space to try. I know that like when I first got married, I was in charge of all the financial stuff. And to be honest, I was very good at it. And in my mind, I kept telling myself, my husband would never be able to do this as good as me. So let's say, for example, I would get a credit card bill and I realized I made a mistake and I would call however long it took and I would get that fee removed and so on. And I was like, my husband would never do this. Now, with time, when I started taking a step back and really like getting my marriage to a place of balance, I realized this is not good for me. And I gave over the whole financial piece to my husband. Now, at the beginning, he was not so excited because he enjoyed not having it. And he was trying to convince me that he can't do it. And I remember the first time that we got a credit card bill after I gave it up, and he was standing, I can tell you exactly where it was in the kitchen in front of the toaster. And he opens up the bill and he's like, why do we get a late fee? And a part of me is like, oh, we got a late fee? And I'm like, no, I'm just totally staying out of this. And I'm giving him the feeling that I have confidence in him. And P.S., I didn't say anything. Now, till today, I don't know whatever happened with that late fee, but I guarantee you that the calmness and the happiness that I got in the long run was worth way more than that $35 could have been. And I think that sometimes we imagine that our husbands can't do it, but maybe they really are more capable if we give them the space to do it. Now, if your husband really is not capable, then is there any other support person in your life that could help you with it? See if you can like brainstorm. Maybe there's someone else, maybe there's a relative, maybe there's a friend, maybe there's some caring mentor. But for sure, you definitely want to like decrease the pressure, because when you're feeling so pressured, you're not going to be able to tap into your best self, and you won't be able to tap into your husband's best self. So that's what I would say in 3 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, Rivka.
Yeah, having the support is really important. But I guess I'm curious why he's not able to partake in things, and if they've had a discussion about it and communicated about it and had some sort of dialogue or attempt to understand, so he could understand the pressure that she's feeling. Like, I guess I just don't have enough information because I don't know if they've spoken about it or tried speaking about it. But yeah, I mean, that has to be communicated in such a way where he can hear what's going on for her and how difficult it is. And usually if you listen long enough, everyone makes sense. So if he listens long enough to what she's sharing, naturally he may be inspired to help lift some of her burden.
So doing the reversal of what you suggested in when you gave the process for how to listen. So she would be the person who was sharing this time.
Yeah, she would be she'd say, I need to, is there a time we can speak about something? I need to share a frustration I'm having. And then when he would agree to sit down with her, she'd say, using as much I statement as possible, I'm really overwhelmed with the burden of raising this family. I really need support. This is what I'm feeling. Not, you never help me. You just sit there. no, this is what I need. I'm really feeling frustrated. Da, da, da. Keep going till she gets it all out. And if he's aware of the process and he can help, you know, if they've discussed beforehand, this is how they want to communicate, then perhaps he can really validate her and say, wow, I didn't, you know, you really do have a lot on your plate and I didn't realize how hard it was. And that makes sense, because it really is a lot. And I imagine you must be feeling terribly overwhelmed and alone. And sometimes maybe that's all she needs to get back up again and wake up in the morning and do what she needs to do. Just being heard and validated sometimes is enough for people. And then other times the change, where she could maybe ask, you know, here are two things I could really use. Are you able to pitch in, you know, and ask? But again, using I statements and making sure the environment is one of no shame and no blame.
Okay, somebody just asked the question. We'll take another minute on this. What if his response is not validating at all?
So it's a question of if you guys have like even learned about how to have no blame, no shame communication. This is very new. So somebody totally unaware of it would not probably validate. They'd probably feel defensive and they'd probably, you know, again, want to defend themselves. So it's a process. If you start modeling that way of communicating on a regular basis over time, when there's only one person that's actually doing the work, over time, the hope is that the family members will actually start to copy the way of communicating. If you're using I statements all the time, you know, not blaming, the hope is that he'll pick up and follow along at some point. But it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. This is years and years of practice, and it would be good to start together if possible, but if not, start on your own, modeling the behavior that you want to see.
Thank you. Kayla.
Okay. I'm just going to add on instead of reiterate anything in the interest of time. So just two things that I see come up a lot is, so I don't know if this is this particular question, but it could be somebody on the call. It's probably somebody on the call. It's probably some of us, which is that the more overwhelmed we feel, the more likely we are to present our husbands with a lose-lose. So it's, I'm disappointed with you about this. And the other option is not, I will be really grateful and happy if we can work something out, right? Like, especially when we're carrying around a story like he's clueless, I don't remember what the other adjective she gave, but where it was almost like the reality is that I'm just stuck with this and there's nothing he can do. So then it's very hard to go into a conversation with offering him a win, right? Like, and I like to just have my clients and even myself, like, stop before a conversation like this and say, like, how can he win here? And am I willing to be really happy? Am I willing to be happy with any outcome at all? Right? Or am I going into this conversation presenting like, you just have a disgruntled wife? I'm just dissatisfied with you and I'd like to communicate that, right? Because if that's the case, it's not going to be a productive conversation. But if I stop and I say, wait, because what happens for us, especially those of us who are kind of type A, whatever, is our pattern is to raise the bar. As soon as he's helping with the dishes, how come he didn't wipe down the counters and also clean out the sink, right? It's like, as soon as he get there, we're ready for the next thing because we do that to ourselves. And then we do it to him. So then he knows, like, why am I going to put all the effort in? She's only ever going to continue to add on to what I need to do to make her happy. He just wants to make you happy, right? So before the conversation, having that moment. And then the other thing, if I'll say it really fast, is that often what will happen with this mental load type issue is that we keep the reins. There's kind of a similar thing, meaning I want him to take it over, but I want him to take it over the way that I would do it. I'm not willing to give over the veto. I'm not willing to give over the timeline. I'm not willing to give over the point at which he says, the kitchen's clean now, right? It has to be according to my standards, which is probably based on my socialization and all of that. And so if we want our husbands to take something off of our plate, one thing that's very helpful is to really check in with ourselves. Am I willing to put him in charge of this whole area and give him those decisions? If not, let me own that I'm holding it on to myself, holding on to it for myself. That's what I meant to say.
Thank you, Kayla. Somebody asked a question. So Kayla, if you can just take a minute to answer this person's question, that would be great. Don't men feel attacked when we say we want to talk to them about something? When is a good time? They already put up their guard.
Well, definitely the approach could, meaning it can come across different ways based on how we say it. But I always say, like, the best person to ask is your husband. So we
Meaning,
can just say to him, hey,
yeah.
when something's coming up and I want to just make sure we have a good time to talk, what's the best way for me to do that with you? Let him tell you.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go on to the next question. We're starting with Rivka. This is a long question. I apologize. We like all questions here. How can I be accepting of my husband's parenting style when it is so different than mine, specifically in the way we speak to the kids? I deeply believe that children's self-esteem needs to be built up and validated. So I use a gentle parenting approach. For example, giving them time and space to think for themselves and solve conflict, even when quarreling with their sibling, validating their feelings, etc. My husband is more stern and uses harsher language to get the kids to listen and respect him. For example, he uses threats like taking away their toys for the night. In his more authoritarian approach, it's hard for me to sit back and hear it because while the short-term goal may be reached, for example, they do what was told, albeit grumpily, it hurts me to think that it could have been handled much more gently and their self-esteem preserved. My husband is sensitive when I mention our different styles because he believes what he's doing is for their best, and I couldn't disagree more. So it makes for a lot of tension.
I'm sure. So yes, it's important to get on the same page for parenting, and I wonder if they talked about it when they were first dating, like a lot of us do, about our dreams for how we want to raise our kids and the commonalities that we shared. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It's really great when a couple can be on the same page and talk about, their dreams and the way they want the family and home to run. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, communicating safely about this vision and creating it together is going to be really important, and it's going to take time. But it would be really great if he could hear why it means so much to you for raising the kids in this way, because it probably is based on your own childhood experience and maybe some things you don't want to repeat that you experienced, if that's why you feel so strongly about it. And it would be important, I think, for him to hear that deep desire that you have and ultimately have compassion for your childhood story, because if he hears it really deep enough, he will naturally want to please you and want to change and want to get on the same page as parents. You were attracted to each other or you picked each other for a reason. So you're probably not that far off as you think, because otherwise you probably would not have been attracted to each other. And I can say that just based on Harville Hendrix's research and just my knowledge of this. But yeah, you do need to get on the same page, and having safe opportunities to connect and create your vision together is important.
Thank you, Rivka. Kayla.
Okay. Yeah, to piggyback on what Rivka's saying about more in common, what I hear from the question is two very committed parents who are both intentional in how they're parenting. Right. And so that's 90% of the battle. Right now, you're just down to details. And I know that I know gentle parenting. So I know that that's not, it can feel almost scary when you hear like, this is what this is creating and all of that. And so what I would say to start would be, if you really are concerned, one of the best pieces of advice we ever got was there's no need for fights, just Shilas. Find somebody that the two of you both respect when it comes to parenting that you can go to and just present the question, right? Just say, this is the way that I want to parent. This is the way he's parenting. And then again, similar to the last thing that I said, which is be resolved with the answer. Because in any situation like this, we want to make sure as we go in, yes, I want him to hear about what this means to you and the backstory, like Rivka said so beautifully. I also want to make sure as you're having that conversation that you're giving equal space for the way he's thought out how he's parenting, equal space for where his ideas have come from, right? Because sometimes we go in and like, we're so nervous that we need to win because my children's entire emotional well-being is on the line. When really, if you zoom out, what you want for your kids, what's going to be even more impactful is two parents who are respectful, who are on the same page, who support each other, even if their styles are different. Kids are really intelligent and they can understand it goes like this with mommy and it goes like this with daddy. And so I would definitely ask the Shyla if you're very concerned, but I think like really, it sounds like you guys are both intentional and loving parents and you've got a lot to work with here.
Thank you, Kayla. Chana.
Okay. So firstly, I would say I really get you. This is something that I myself really grappled with. I had children with a very like conscientious and thought out plan of exactly how I was going to raise them. And I really liked my plan. And my husband had his plan, which was very different than mine, and he loved his plan. Now, when it started with my first kid, I was doing it my way and he was doing it his way. And to be honest, it drove me crazy. And I remember even thinking like, okay, this is based on his childhood and he has to heal it and I'm going to go get him help and so on and so forth. And then I actually started getting out of his way and owning up to what I could do. And what I started noticing is that we each have our own ways and they don't have to be a contradiction. It's okay if mommy is more like this and Tati is more like that. And if you think about it in real life, how often does it happen that a child has a Rebbe who has one way of disciplining and one personality of how he runs the classroom, and an English teacher who has a totally opposite? And in a certain sense, when our children are exposed to both sides, it really helps them deal with the outside world. And if you think about it, Hashem gave a child two parents from totally different backgrounds, two different genders, two different personalities. And I think that when we're able to acknowledge that and accept that, things really get easier. Now, let me tell you what happened at the end later on. So Baruch Hashem, that little boy is actually almost 20, which I can't believe. But recently, like this, this probably goes back about like 3 years ago at his birthday party. He said, okay, I want to speak. And he said, I want to thank my mother for being so loving and so caring and so understanding of me all the time. And I want to thank my father for always showing me when I did the wrong thing so I could be better. And I was through there, I'm like, oh my. And it was amazing for me to see it, how he was able to really be able to take the best of his mother and the best of his father and bring it to a place of balance. And I think that when we realize that it's okay for us to be different, it takes away tremendous amounts of stress. And ironically enough, the more that I let go, the more that my husband actually started doing things that were more in line of what I had wanted originally. Because I felt like as long as I was like down his back, it wasn't working. And if you think about it, like it makes sense. If you're, let's say, trying to do homework with your child, and all of a sudden someone starts chasing you, you're not exactly thinking, what's the best way to do my homework, the homework with his child. And that's like, husbands can feel very threatened when wives are too on top of them. And if your husband's busy thinking, is my wife judging me by how I'm putting this kid to sleep right now? He's not going to tap into his best husband self. But if you give him that feeling of confidence and really know that he can do a good job putting your child to sleep, he really will. Now, obviously, if we're talking about a case where someone's really getting hurt or abused, that's a totally different story. But here we're just talking about different parenting styles. And I think accepting that and allowing it to be is really the best route to go about it.
Okay, thank you. All right. So our final question that was sent in. My question is, how can I know if I have become accepting, or maybe I am simply numb to something that really bothered me a lot in the past? I used to try to be somewhat controlling in a certain area, and nowadays I just don't get involved. But I'm not sure if that's because I've accepted the situation for what it is, or if I've numbed out because it was so distressing. Thank you for the opportunity to ask my question. I think we're starting with Kayla, right?
It's a hard one.
Do it.
I'm glad there are three of us here. I would question the word numbed. I think there's space in our relationships for just knowing this doesn't need any more energy. I'm done. I can move on from this part. This isn't worth it. I'd rather focus my energy on building or on the things that we are doing well. I think once we start using the word numbed, it's like, now it's scary. I don't know. Are we numb? Is it like, she's even asking, I don't know if I'm numb. What is numb? How do we check for numb? Right. So it's like, it becomes like a very big thing. So I would just check if is there some underlying resentment? Do you have some low level resentment that things haven't worked out? And then honestly, what does it say? Like the energy goes where the mind, whatever, like where do we want to put our energy? What do we want to be building? I really do think that we sometimes, again, going back to this, we want to be perfect. We want to do it all right. We want our marriage. So we're like checking every single inch of our marriage. Is there anything wrong here? Is there anything wrong here? Is there anything wrong here? Like, let me fix it all up. But I think that like, if ultimately you see lots of good, you got lots of good building blocks, things are going well, this is good, let me work more on that, this is an area I want to focus on. I don't know that we need to have everything down to the perfect T, like everything working perfect. There's no one's grading you in your marriage, right? So I would just say that, like, I think if you're not feeling the resentment come up, and you would know, because you would feel it emotionally, you would see it in the way you behave. If you're feeling resentful, you're going to be a little bit more snappy, you're going to be a little more judgmental, it's going to come out somehow with you, or you're just going to like shove a box of Oreos in your mouth, right? Like we all do different things. So it's all good. So if you're feeling resentful, you would see it somehow in your behavior coming out. We don't push down emotions very effectively. Or take an embodied dance workshop with Rena, and then maybe she can help you figure out what's going on. All right, that's all I got.
Thank you, Kayla. Okay, Chana.
Okay, so I think that was a great answer. I think that if you really tap into yourself, just like get quiet and just feel in yourself, like, how do I feel about this? And either you're going to come to a place of peace where you know that you got to acceptance, or you're going to feel like anger, resentment, frustration. And then you know that, yes, like you numbed yourself. And then like the next thing really is like, what do you want to do to help yourself deal with this better? So I would say really just like tune into yourself and just see like, what is coming up for me?
Thank you, Chana. Rivka.
So at first, I wasn't alarmed by the question. I didn't think it was a big deal. But then actually, I'm actually thinking that it is something to be curious about, and maybe more urgently than it sounds, because so we like to talk about how there's two types of people. There are maximizers, people that like to express their energy. The way they get safe is through interacting with others, it's through getting loud, it's through talking, really pushing energy out. And then there's minimizers. Those people are like turtles, where they get safe by going internally. But when both are in danger, so if you can imagine, in Imago, we like to tell the story of the turtle in a hailstorm. So a hailstorm, once upon a time, she's raining her hail down, and she wants attention, and she wants to be seen, and she wants to be heard. And the turtle's walking by, minding his own little business, ignoring her just with his little shell. And she's like, hey, I want to be seen. So she pounds her hail even more and pounds it on his shell. And he's like, ooh, this is scary. So he goes farther and farther into his shell. And then one day he just becomes a snapping turtle because it's too much. So what concerns me about this question is that if she is a minimizer, she's the turtle, where she gets safe by either, it's not fight or flight, it's freeze or submit. It's possible she's just submitted. And it would be good to use the rest of what's going on in their marriage as a temperature gauge, because how is their connection in other ways? If their connection in other ways has also fizzled out, this is going to be a problem that doesn't get better on its own. So, I mean, what's going on in the bedroom? What's going on in other ways? There are ways to detect the temperature gauge of the relationship. So I wouldn't want to see a turtle or someone who's a minimizer constantly be in freeze or submit mode, because that is danger mode, that is reptilian brain. And that is not a good place to live all the time. So use it as a clue. I don't know the severity of the situation, but I would get curious about, okay, what's the level of kind of submitting here? Is it just, okay, this is not an issue anymore that bothers me, and that's totally fine. Maybe she's integrated things in herself. Maybe she's decided, we don't have to be the same. We don't have to be matchy-patchy about everything. We can be different. And that's a great place to be. But if she's just kind of rolling over and playing dead, I don't think that's a great place to be. And I think that's a clue that there's some work that needs to be done to kind of clean up the pollution in the relationship.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so somebody wrote a question in the chat, and we have another few minutes before my final question for all of you. So Kayla started, so Chana, you'll take this one. We'll start with this one, and we'll We'll go till 10 minutes to the hour. So wherever we got through, we got through. I keep asking my husband over and over the same thing, and he does not comply. The way I see it is he does not care, or something is wrong with him.
Okay. So I like what you're saying, the way I see it, okay? Because notice that that's the way you're interpreting it. Now, the question is, can you have a nice conversation with him after proving to yourself that he really does care? Okay. Find as many proofs as you can. Literally sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and find for yourself proofs that he cares for you. Think about times in your life that he has cared for you. That will melt your anger. Once you're feeling better, have a nice conversation with him and tell him, like, I'm trying to figure out, this is something that means so much to me. I know that you really care about me. I'm wondering, is there something that we could do to have this need met? Okay? It's going to come across so differently than if you're like, okay, I know you don't care about me, and I already answered this 10 times, and nothing's changing. Automatically, he's just going to get defensive. But if you're going to first prove to yourself that he does care about you, and then present it in like a calm, curious way, and as a way of like, I believe that you could figure this out for me, or figure this out for us, I think you're going to have a totally different response. And that's a trick also, which is really good, is try to come with calmness and curiosity. And if you think about it, that's really what Hashem did with Adam and Chava, right? Hashem put two people on the earth. They totally messed up. What does Hashem say? Ayeka, where are you? Calm and curious. The same thing with your husband. If you're coming with calm and curious energy, you'll be able to work things through. If you're coming with anger, resentment, it's just going to end up being a fighting match. For those of you who tried it, you know it doesn't work. Try this, see what happens.
Thank you. Rivka, anything you want to add?
Yeah, sure. So the word comply triggered me a little bit because he is not your child. He doesn't need to comply. But anyway, I think it was just the way she wrote it. Anyhow, I think one of the things that's really painful is that we go from, there are 3 stages of relationship. And the romantic stage is when we first meet, whether, you dated the shidduch system and you didn't have a love story, but you just made a conscious choice to commit to this person. The romantic stage, it's so much fun. You're planning your wedding, you're dating, you're getting jewelry. It's like so much fun. You meet someone who feels like they complete you, who they understand you, you get each other on a deep level, and you feel the same about things. And that romantic stage lasts on average 6 months. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? We enter the power struggle, and no longer do we feel like the same about things. And I don't like the same foods as you anymore, and I don't want to watch the same things, and I don't want to listen to the same things. And it's like this rude awakening, like, oh my gosh, what happened? He used to bring me flowers and I don't feel cared for anymore. So it's kind of like this rude awakening. And when we get into that power struggle, we think, oh my gosh, like, did I marry the wrong person? Like, did I really end up with the right person who is supposed to be for me? And that is very normal. What most people don't realize is there's a 3rd stage of relationships called the conscious marriage, which is like real lasting love. So that's one point I wanted to make, that there are 3 stages of relationship, and sometimes the progression, the transition from romantic stage to power struggle can be very shocking, very upsetting, and feel painful. The other thing is, I don't know how the wife here asks her husband for certain things, but it's really good to use like the acronym SMART goals. So like something that's a request that's specific, measurable, action oriented, realistic, and time sensitive. So if it's like, well, I don't feel cared for and you don't love me, well, is that specific? Is that measurable where an outsider can come in and be like, yes, you love her? No, it's really impossible to measure that. It's not really realistic. It's not time sensitive, and it's not so action oriented. So if you can incorporate those requests and make them SMART requests, it will be a lot easier for him to comply.
Thank you.
So, sure.
Okay, so we're at time for that question. So Kayla, we didn't get to you for this one. But that was nice to be able to get in another question. And there are women who wrote more questions in the chat, but unfortunately we don't have more time to answer them. So maybe another time, or you can reach out to any of our panelists privately. So my final question for each of you, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I think it's really important that, why did I bring 3 quote unquote competitors, into our circle here? Because as from Jews, we believe our parnasa is decided for us from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Nobody can get in the way of that. And so now what I would like each of you to do, Rivka, Kayla, and Chana, I would like each of you to talk about the other 2 panelists, just taking 2 to 3 minutes total, explaining what value you see in their approach, and why people might want to turn to them to work with them as a resource to help them move forward with their marriage. So I'll give you a moment. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. Give me
I want to go first. I'm excited about this.
I was just going to say that, Kayla.
Okay, sure, Kayla, go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that first of all, just the idea that what Rivka and her husband have of, we've seen this demonstrated so beautifully through the course of these questions and answers, discussing the space between the relationship and in the couple. And, as someone who works just with the woman, there are times where that's something that I, need. I need her to go and work on the relationship with her husband. And even just the idea of it, the fact that you do them as retreats, I think is so beautiful to just be able to step away. So I think that just that approach to the relationship as its own entity is so beautiful that Rivka shared. And I think is like, very compelling. I'm like, can I set, do one in Ramape Shavish? Let me know. As for Chana, I just really appreciated how she consistently brought Hashem back into the picture, right? Because this is really what we're here, what we're doing, and, has sources for what she's bringing, and it just is able to anchor everything back into the Torah so beautifully. So I think for so many of us, that's something that just allows us to feel very grounded. And, it's so often in marriage, we get focused on like getting my needs met. And when we bring Hashem into the picture, we realize that our lives have so much more. There's so much more going on than that. So I just really appreciated that part of her approach.
Thank you. Okay, who wants to go next?
I can go next.
Sure.
So I really am going to piggyback on what Kayla says about Chana. I really appreciate everything being brought back to Hashem and the davening aspect. And it is so grounding, and it almost is like a step over the garbage to reconnect us to our source and kind of like getting out of the junk and the funk, because it takes us above and elevates things and brings us back to our root and connection to God, which is what marriage is really about, as a parable as to our relationship with God. So I really appreciated that, Chana. And Kayla, I really like your no nonsense logic. What you seem to have like a very logical style where it's like, what are the facts on the ground? What is the story you're telling yourself, so you can kind of also get very clear and like turn off those yappy voices, drunk Bob on the street, like telling you that everything's wrong and everything's bad, and just kind of like really centering and getting focused on what's real. So thank you.
Thank you. Chana.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank both of you for your feedback. I appreciate that. Okay, so I really like the approach that Rivka has as far as like going very deep. Sometimes people really need to do that. They really need to go very deep, and they really need to just like sit down with their husband in front of someone else and really just like pull things apart and come to that place of understanding with a mediator. And I totally see that. I work primarily like with women, and like at times I'll speak to the husband from time to time, but I do see that can be very effective. And I think also what's nice about Rivka's approach is also it's very systematic. So for like someone that has like that type of personality, they can like appreciate, okay, so I'll do this, and I'll do that. As far as Kayla goes, I feel like it's a very positive approach. It sounds like it doesn't make doesn't make issues out of molehills, or the opposite. It doesn't, yeah, right, yes, exactly. And I feel like all of us, Baruch Hashem, I think we're all on the same mission, and I think it's it really is amazing. And I feel like working on our marriages really is something that enhances every single aspect of our life, not just like in this, like, as we know, like in the next world, but even in this world, like the quality of your life will really very much be dependent on the quality of your marriage. And yes, Baruch Hashem, there are so many wonderful qualified people out there helping people, and pick an approach that works for you and really stick to it and make that commitment, because it'll really get you far in life.
Amazing. Okay, so we have another few minutes before the hour. So I don't know if any of you have a website or a gift or something that you want people can download, or a resource. So you can all just go around and say what you have to offer, so people can learn more about you and what you have to offer. So whoever wants to start.
Okay, I can start. Yeah. Okay, fine. So if you go, either you can sign up through my website for a free chapter of my upcoming book, or if you look on the bottom of the like the bio that Rena wrote, you can click onto that. You can get a free chapter over there. I also just started a really powerful group coaching program, which is called Connections. And we're really working on enhancing our connections with really everyone in our life. We just started it last week. But if anyone still wants to join, we have another 5 weeks. It's basically on Thursday mornings, and it's a really, really powerful program. Last week's is recorded. So if it's something that interests you, feel free to reach out to me. You can either email me experienceharmonynow@gmail.com. If you want to call or text 917-690-2275. And it's really been a pleasure. And I wish you all real happiness and harmony in your homes and lives.
Thank you, Chana. Susie?
I can go next. So our website is themarriagerestorationproject.com. themarriagerestorationproject.com. We have a free guide that anyone can download on the top nav bar. And I'll just plug an upcoming marriage workshop that we have, where people can sign up in person or online and participate with their husbands. It's going to be in Baltimore on March 6th and 7th. Or like I said, you can also participate with your husband online. It's a little funky, the time zone difference in Israel, so it's not ideal for Israel attendees. But if you're in the States or somewhere where you can make an Eastern time zone work out for you, it's really an amazing, it's the Getting the Love You Want workshop, which is the foundational workshop of imago therapy.
Oh, and Rivka, thank you. And you were going to just quickly mention a shorter book than Getting the Love You Want?
Oh, so either they can read my husband's book, which is the 5-step action plan to a happy and healthy marriage. That's available on Amazon.
What's your husband's name?
It's Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin. There's also a link from the top nav bar of our website to the book on Amazon. So it's the 5-step action plan to a happy and healthy marriage. He really distills all of Harville Hendrix's work into very clear 5 logical, simple steps. So it will break everything down very, very simply. I mean,
amazing.
You have to do the work, but it's,
of course.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rivka. Okay, sure. Kayla.
Okay, so my website is kaylalevin.com, keeping it simple. And I have there a mini workbook. So it's just like a short thing you can print out. It's called a marriage check-in. Just give you some ideas of what stories might be mucking up the environment for you in your mind. And most people follow me on my podcast, which is called How to Glow. So you can find that on any Apple, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, all over the place if you want. Once you're on my email list, there's also a link. You can get it through WhatsApp. So I'm happy to connect over there.
Amazing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your wisdom, devoting the last 90 minutes to really helping build Torah homes, healthy homes. And may we all be zocha to really just have those homes that we are all hoping for, and give that nachas ruach to Hashem. So thank you everyone for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for doing this, Rena.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Thanks.